Is getting an MBA worth the price of admission? Well, stick around because as a corporate recruiter, I'm going to share with you our thoughts on candidates who have the MBA versus candidates who don't. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to talk to you about MBAs and whether or not we as recruiters feel that they're worth it. I've spent the last 20 years of my career interviewing and hiring thousands of people into some of the world's most well-known companies, hired at all levels of the organization, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on the candidates that have the MBA. But before we get into it, if you're interested in more career advice and tips and tricks directly from a recruiter, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Okay, so let's talk about MBAs. Now, the reason why I decided to make this video is I had a recent interview with a candidate who actually rejected an offer because they felt that we were undervaluing them because they had an MBA versus what the position required. And the thing is that I wasn't actually requiring the MBA, so we weren't able to get a deal done. But it got me thinking this concept about MBAs and whether or not you should get them, and if you get them, what point in your career does it make the most sense to go out and secure the MBA? Because let's face it, it's a major expense and it's a major time commitment. So should you get the MBA? I think it really is an individual question. Really just depends on where you see yourself going in your career. If you're somebody that has aspirations to move to the very top of your industry, then of course the MBA is going to be something that you really want to seriously consider getting at some point in your career. If you're somebody that is really, and I think you need to do some soul searching on this, because not everybody is cut out to rise to the very tops of organizations. It does take a certain kind of mindset. But if you're somebody that realistically is going to shoot for an individual contributor role or a mid-tier management position, I don't really know if that MBA is going to give you the value that you're hoping for. And so I guess let's explain it from a recruiter's perspective. So when I am interviewing for a position or when I'm recruiting for a position, there are basic requirements. You'll see it on a job description. There'll be basic requirements, and then it'll list out the minimum requirements that you have to have. Really kind of a little insider tip, look for what the preferred qualifications are. In some cases, they will list out that they prefer somebody to have the MBA, but I've never recruited a position, in even some senior level positions, where the MBA was an absolute requirement. And so there's always flex on there. We're certainly not going to turn down a candidate who has really great experience and has achieved a lot in their career just because they don't have the MBA. So that being said, minimum you should have a college degree if you're looking to move into a large corporation, into a mid-tier management role or above. But as far as the MBA is concerned, I've never had a hiring manager say if they don't have an MBA, don't send them. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no opportunities out there that hiring managers won't require that, but at least in the positions that I've recruited, and I've recruited pretty senior level positions at major corporations, I've just never seen that being a hard and fast rule. So when we get those requirements from the hiring manager, we're basically sitting down, we create what's called an ideal candidate profile, and I go out and recruit against what the hiring manager is looking for for the person to reasonably succeed in that position. And I'm almost never using MBAs as a search criteria. Now, maybe if it's a very senior position and I've got way too many candidates to look at and I'm trying to narrow down the field, maybe I'll search by people just specifically at the MBA just to kind of narrow the field. But it's not a requirement. It's not a hard and fast. I'm really more interested in the type of experience that you have versus that MBA. And that's kind of a blanket statement. That's almost across every position. So I would say experience in almost every case is going to trump education insofar as you meet the basic requirements of the position. So that being said, I think that from that perspective, recruiters, we kind of don't care that you have the MBA. And I don't mean to say that we don't look at it and say, hey, that's a great achievement. But if you have an MBA and you're interviewing for a mid-tier position or an individual contributor position, the MBA is going to do almost nothing for you as far as your experience. In other words, if you have the MBA and no experience, we are going to almost always opt for the person who has the experience over the person who just has the MBA. So that being said, you should really focus on getting the experience over that. Now that kind of plays a part in entry level. I know a lot of candidates who will come straight out of school will stay in school longer and go for an MBA, and thinking that it's gonna kind of set them up for success in the future. Now, that is a strategy, and it's one good strategy about it is you can kind of get it out of the way right away, but it's probably not going to give you a whole lot more ammunition, especially if you're interviewing for positions, entry level especially, that just don't require it. So where companies will not, I hate to say it this way, but we won't value it the way that you value it, in terms of whether or not you would stand out as a candidate and whether or not we would pay you more specifically for the MBA. Because if a position pays a certain amount, it just pays a certain amount. We're looking for a person to fill that position effectively, who can effectively do the job. The MBA is not going to necessarily do anything for you other than, between no experience and an MBA with no experience, you probably would get a look at first. But this candidate was an entry-level candidate who declined an offer because they had a master or an MBA and felt like we weren't valuing it. And they wanted to really go kind of find a position that they felt maybe would be better aligned for them. So again, it's not to say that MBA is not valuable, but recruiters don't really value it, and it's not something that most recruiters are going to be looking for. Now, again, I'm sure I'll have a recruiter friend or two say, well, actually, we require it for our positions, and there's always going to be a company that might require it for a specific position, but holistically, kind of across the board, I'm willing to bet that 95% of positions do not have that MBA requirement. So if you have one, and especially if you're going for an individual contributor role or a mid-tier management position, again, that MBA is not going to do a whole lot to help you. And again, you're not going to automatically get paid more. Now, you might be able to use it to kind of negotiate a little bit more in base comp, but realistically, there's not going to be a huge bump for you because of that. So don't go in getting an MBA. Don't go get an MBA and go into an interview expecting that a company is going to recognize that, especially if the position doesn't call for that. So I'll say that up kind of up front. Now, where I think it might make a bigger difference is if you're going into a senior level position, and I'm talking you're one or two steps below the divisional head or depending on the size of the company that you're in, but a pretty far up, a pretty advanced position, then the MBA probably becomes more important. So, a lot of top companies executive teams and executive team -1 or executive team -1 or maybe even -2 depending on the size of the company may actually require it for certain positions there. But generally speaking, if you're coming in from outside of the market or outside of the company, then it's going to be, maybe you would need to have it. But in a lot of cases, if you're working internally and you are considered a kind of a superstar or somebody that's been identified as a top performer or somebody that they really want to develop into future leadership, in a lot of cases, you're actually going to get a tap on the shoulder. So if you just have the undergrad degree and you are really kind of killing it, you'll get a tap on the shoulder and they'll say, hey, we want to groom you for the next round or the next level, and let's talk about that MBA. So a lot of times it'll be the tap on the shoulder situation, and then you get the MBA. The company typically will pay for it. That's another advantage. And then you can move into that position after you've achieved that MBA, and then that might be a requirement internally. I think as far as if you're looking at getting an MBA just because you think it might help with your career or your career trajectory, unless that's the case where you're looking really at senior level positions that absolutely demand it, you may want to think about the timing of it in your career, and it might actually be better for you to focus on getting the experience first and then working your way up, showing that you can perform at that lower level, because you're going to have to pay your dues and work your way up from progressively through a series of promotions and internal promotions in a company. And the chances are, if it's a big company that's going to be supportive of that or really require that for the next level, then you can get a tap on the shoulder. But I've worked with some very senior level, very smart people that don't have that graduate degree. So I think it's something to think about. It is a huge time commitment, and especially as you get further along in your career, you get family, you get houses and mortgages and soccer practices and all that kind of stuff that you need to start going to. It does get to be more difficult the further you get in your career. So that's one advantage if you're thinking maybe knocking the MBA out early, and that way you have it. But generally speaking, they're really expensive. So if you go in getting an MBA thinking, oh, it'll pay for itself, chances are it's probably not going to pay for itself, at least not for a long while, especially if you are entry level or near entry level, first few years of your career. You're probably just not going to see a huge return on that investment until you get much later in your career. And so I guess, strategically, how do you want to do it? If you can knock it out when you don't have commitments and you don't have significant others and, kind of family situations that might make it more difficult, maybe it's worth doing it early in your career. But again, it really just depends on your personal situation and what your aspirational goal is. Again, if you're just looking for an individual, a high contributing individual contributor role, or a mid-level manager, there's nothing wrong with that, but I just don't know if the MBA is really going to help you in that perspective. It's certainly not going to be something that they would take into consideration if there's an adverse employment decision, a layoff, or something like that. So if you think that it's going to help you in your career, certainly I wouldn't discourage you from doing it, but I personally, if it was me, I would look at trying to get the experience rather than the education, because experience is almost always going to trump the education in the long run. And then it's always better to have a company pay for your education, and then instead of you having to take out more student loans. I just wanted to give you, from a recruiter's perspective, what we think about. If you are considering your career and trying to look at the strategy behind it, I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button, because I actually talk a lot about this in my channel. And I actually have a website called alifeafterlayoff.com. It's not just for people who've been laid off, but it is designed to be a career coaching tool. So make sure you head over there and check it out. There's a lot of articles on there, a lot of really great free content. I also have, if you're looking to position yourself to get noticed by those recruiters, by people like me at major corporations, to try to get your foot in the door, I also have a training called the Ultimate Layoff Bootcamp. Now, it's not just for people who've been laid off. It's really designed to give you an insider's look into the hiring process at major corporations and give you the best chance of getting noticed and getting through that process and landing that offer. Similarly, I also have a training course called Resume Rocket Fuel. If you're applying for positions and you're just not getting results, your resume is almost always the problem. So something to check out too. It teaches you actually how to write a resume that's going to get noticed by people like me, or give you the best chance of getting noticed by people like me. I also have a free 5-day boot camp, and it's for job seekers. So if you're looking to kind of give yourself a competitive advantage, make sure you check that out too. Otherwise, just wanted to give you that insight. If you're on the fence on the MBA, it's just, you got to kind of weigh your pros and cons. You got to put, maybe write out a chart, pros and the cons of each one, and just do what makes most sense for you. But I would say in general, if you are not at the kind of the senior level, or aspiring or reasonably close to the senior level, it's really just kind of a judgment call on what you would do, and it really just depends. It's an individual decision. So hopefully this helps somebody. If you have any questions for me, leave a comment below, and I'll try to get to them. Anyway, I appreciate you stopping by today, and we will see you on the next one.